this is John from Heroes and Legends, and today is part 4 of our Tempest Remastered Set review, and we're going to be looking at the red cards. So this is part 4 of 6. We've already looked at the white, the blue, the black cards. Tomorrow we'll take a look at the green cards, and Saturday we'll look at everything else in the set. So let's go ahead and get started and jump right in. Our first card is Aftershock, and this is a very, very versatile sorcery. It lets you get rid of artifact, creature, or land. Yeah, sure, you're going to take 3 damage, but don't let that stop you from playing this card. It's an awesome card. It might be a little bit hard to splash if, say, red's your splash color, but phenomenal card. This is awesome. Anarchist, and this is very good in a burn deck. You don't want to pay 5 for a 2/2 and not get a sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. So if you have a lot of targets, yeah, you're going to run this guy unlimited and you'll be pretty happy. If you don't have that many sorcery targets, though, definitely want to leave him out. Next is Barb Sliver, and this is a fine sliver. He's a 2/2, and it's always nice to get a mono-colored sliver that starts out at 2/2, and you can pump him, and of course he's got synergy with all other slivers, so he's going to be great even if you have a couple slivers in your deck. But even if he's the only one, he's still a pretty good guy. You're paying 3 for a 2/2, and you have the ability, especially mid to late game, to pump up his power a little bit, so he can make combat very difficult for your opponents to gauge. Very good limited card. Canyon Wildcat. So he's a decent limited guy. He's a 2/1 for 2, which isn't super exciting, but if you're playing against red, the Mountain Walk is a pretty big deal. So he's not always going to make your cut in your deck when you first build, but whenever you're in a red matchup and there's going to be an opportunity to Mountain Walk, absolutely you're probably going to want to sideboard this guy in. Craven Giant, and he's a big, kind of dumb creature for 1. The only thing I will say, he's very good if you have maybe some removal to back him up so that he can continue to get across his damage. The only issue is most of the time he's just going to trade with another creature. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but he's very offensive. You're going to have to just keep attacking in with him until the point where your opponent is just kind of forced to block. Maybe you'll get a good creature out of the deal. Maybe this guy will do enough damage to matter. So he can be a decent guy. He's not going to be great for all decks, but he's a very aggro deck centric card. You don't want to necessarily play him if you're trying to go for a long game, but not a bad guy. He's not going to be for every limited deck. Deadshot, and this is a decent removal spell, and it also taps down a creature, so bonus points for that. It's slightly conditional. It does cost 4, which feels a little expensive. It's not an instant, so there are some drawbacks there. Normally, I think in most sets, this card might just be an auto include in limited. This, kind of use your judgment. It's a good card, but there's just so much great removal in this set, and we'll look at some of the red removal. We've already seen some awesome black removal. There's just so much of it that this sometimes might not make your cut at the 4 spot, just because you just got better stuff. But if you need it, it's here, and it's going to do a fine job. Fanning the Flames, and this is an awesome buyback card. This card just can do some serious damage late game. You can keep buying it back and taking it back if you need to, so you can either just basically clear a path for creatures, or if you have enough mana, just go ahead and burn out your opponent. So very good utility card. This is the type of thing, now it's a rare, so you won't see a ton of these floating around, but it's the type of thing you kind of want one of in your aggressive decks or your burn decks. Flame Wave. I like this and I don't like it. It's a limited bomb, obviously. It's just going to decimate your opponent's board state. The only issue with having to pay 4 red mana is pretty pricey and hard to do, especially in limited when you're probably not going to be playing a mono color deck. Now, if it pans out that you're playing mono red, well, this thing is going to be amazing. If you're playing mostly red, maybe splashing another color, you can probably get away with it. However, beyond that, you're probably going to be taking a big gamble including this in your deck. You just might not ever get a chance to cast it. Flowstone Blade, and this is a tricky one. I think if you use it straightforward, put it on one of your creatures, try to get some extra damage across, it's not really that good because basically it opens you up for a 2 for 1. It just feels like you're just trying to wait for a creature with evasion to make this thing good, and the creature has to have decent toughness. There's just too many question marks there. Now, where it's a little better is if you put it on your opponent's creature and then use the ability to -1 their toughness and destroy that creature. Now, it could be a little costly, but it's decent removal. So this is one of those things where I don't know if I'm running it in my limited deck, main deck, just because I probably have a lot better options for burn and removal. But if I need a removal spell, this isn't a bad one. Flowstone Mauler. I like this guy a lot. He's a limited house. He's just going to come down for 6, 4 or 5 trample, and you can even cheat a little bit and get a little extra damage out of him. He's awesome. The only thing I would be careful of is don't get too greedy early in the game with the +1/-1 component, because you might want to just try to cheat a few extra points of damage out, but it could mean the difference of maybe having that creature hit by a removal spell, or more appropriately, a direct damage spell that maybe wouldn't have killed him before. So, be conservative with this guy. Be careful with him. I mean, he's an awesome, valuable asset, and you want to be careful that you don't lower his toughness to a point where he's vulnerable, at least too early in the game. Flowstone Wyvern, basically all the same stuff I said about the last card. This card has evasion with flying as opposed to trample, but both are good. Paying 5 for a 3/3 flyer, that's awesome. Do I use the ability? Maybe, but I am very careful about it. If my opponent's tapped out and the path looks clear, then yeah, that's one thing. But if my opponent's got mana up, I'm going to be very careful, because even 1 damage then could kill this guy. Furnace Brood. And this one, I'm not crazy about this card. I mean, it's an okay guy if you need a guy. He's 4 for a 3/3. He's a hill giant. That's not bad in limited by any means. There's just so many good cards that I don't know if he's always going to make the cut for that reason. But you're going to sideboard this guy in when you're playing against black or green regeneration creatures. And there's a good, fair amount of those out there. So if you're playing against black or green, odds are you're going to come across something with regenerate, and you'll probably want to side this in. Goblin Bombardment. Now, this is a very good aggro finisher, so your aggro creatures that get in for damage, maybe get a little bit of burn, you get your opponent down to the last 5-6 life, and now you can sack all your creatures and finish them off. That's really what this card's for. Early game, it's a dead draw, so that doesn't feel good, but if you have the right limited deck, this is a good asset. You just want to make sure you're playing with a lot of little creatures, and you'll be pretty happy with this card. If you're not, skip it. Kindle. Paying 2 for 2 damage is just fine, and if you get extra copies of Kindle, even better. Then you get a bonus. So this is very fine removal. It's at instant speed. It's awesome. Lightning Blast, another super strong burn spell. This one still sees playing cubes and stuff. Lightning Blast show up, even in things like Legacy Burn. Sometimes it will appear, but it's a really good card. You're paying 4, which seems like a lot, but you'll be very happy to do 4 damage to target creature or opponent at instant speed. Lowland Giant, and this card kind of made me smile because it's Summit Yeti from both Dragons of Tarkir and Khans of Tarkir. Same card. 4/3 for 4. That's a good card today. It's an even better card in the Tempest creature environment, where you didn't see a lot of 4/3s for 4 back in those days. So this is a really good limited guy. He's a little harder to splash if you're just splashing red with a double red, but he's going to do some work for you. Mage Levac, and not real crazy about this one. He's a 2/2 for 3, which isn't a horrible body for 3, but you do have to discard a card at random to get his ability to work, and you have to tap him. If you didn't have to tap him, that'd be a different story maybe, but I really don't like the idea of discarding a card at random and tapping him. You're basically just pinging, and he's just not as good as, say, like a Rootwald or Merfolk or a Prodigal Sorcerer type card. It's just the drawback just seems really severe. So I don't know. If I'm desperate for a creature, I could play him, but odds are he's not going to make my cut. Magmasaur, and this one's a limited bomb. It's got some versatility to it. Obviously, harder to splash if you're just kind of splashing red, but I kind of like this guy. He comes into the battlefield as a 5/5, and then you have the option of just using him as a creature and try to get in for some damage, because he's a pretty big creature. Or if you have some maybe flying creatures that you can't deal with right now, or you want to do some direct damage to each player, you have another option that he can do that as well. So I like the versatility here. Pretty good limited guy. Maniacal Rage, and this can be very decent in the right deck. Shadow leaps to mind. This would be exactly what you want to put on your shadow creature and just get in and attack for an extra 2 and then force your opponent to deal with it. It does open you up for a 2 for 1, but I think it's cheap enough that you can risk that and really make maybe even your weakest shadow creature the lightning rod, and you'll hopefully have your other shadow creatures that will still be able to get some damage across. It's not helpful if you need a blocker in a blocking situation, but it's not a horrible card. Definitely good in shadow decks decks or maybe some aggro builds. Mod conscripts, and he's an okay early curve creature. Obviously, you only want to play this guy in a very, very aggressive creature heavy deck, or else you're just going to get a lot of dead weight. Now, he can still block, but he can attack, and that's okay, but probably not what you really want to do in an aggressive strategy. So if you feel like you have enough creatures in your deck, you can probably run this guy, but be very careful. If you don't feel like you're going to be casting a lot of creature spells, leave him out. Fanatic, and this is a deceptively just good card, and for folks who played with this card, and it's used to see more play back when you could stack damage, because in the old days what you could do is say attack in with him, a creature would block, you put the damage on the stack, and then you can do 1 point of damage, and the damage from the block would still occur. So if it was, say, a 2/2 creature blocking you, you could say, okay, the block happens, put the damage on the stack, I'm going to sacrifice the Mog Fanatic and do 1 damage to the creature, and then the second damage happens. Well, the rules changed a number of years ago that you can't do that anymore, so he started seeing less play. Now, having said all that, he's still a really good creature. You have the versatility of early in the game just getting in for 1/1 damage on the battlefield, and then when you need to, you can just kind of pop him to ping something or hit your opponent. So, pretty good card. Mag Funkies, this is an awesome aggressive card. It's just so aggressively priced that it's amazing. Now it's obviously much better in strong aggressive builds. There are times when this card kind of gets stuck and can't do anything, so you do want to be careful of that. But it's a really fine card. I'm going to run the risk of running this in most decks where I have a decent amount of creatures. Mog Infestation. This is a weird one. It can do a couple things for you. It can either deal with threats that you can't deal with on your opponent's side, or it can double all your creatures. So if you got a lot of small goblins and you just want to double them, that's not a bad thing. So this is okay, but you just got to use it in the right deck. Just kind of think about your deck before you place this thing in there. If it's a deck where you're going to be running a lot of small creatures, a lot of goblins, then yeah, maybe you run one of these. But other than that, you're probably going to skip it. Magmaniac. Whenever he's dealt damage, he gets to deal it back to target opponent. That's kind of a fun ability. You don't really see this anymore. What's nice about it is you put him out, and early game, maybe he gets a couple points of damage across, but then late game, he's a pretty nice chump blocker. So if someone's trying to come at you with a big creature, like a 4/3 or something, you're going to be able to just chump block and get a little value out of him. So kind of like this, a decent limited guy. Ogre Shaman, and he's a good late game guy to help you get through your dead draws. And this is real nice. It's another discarded card at random, but my plan for this card is he's a 3/3 for 5, which is a little overpriced, but he's got a decent body. And then in the late game, when I'm just got a land in my hand or I'm just drawing lands, now I can go ahead and start using his ability and not really losing anything for it. So he's a real good guy. Now he's double red, so you have to be devoted to red. You probably don't want to use him if you have red splash, but he's a real strong creature. Imodium, and this card's pretty crazy. I've seen some interesting constructed builds with this thing over the years, but in limited, it's a risk. You can play this in your deck if you think you're going to have a lot of maybe small creatures. Again, it's a nice complement in an aggro deck where you're going to be able to force a little direct damage through every time you play a creature. However, the downside is your opponent gets to do it as well. So your opponent could start taking out some of your small creatures. If you have some big creatures, Pandemonium can be okay too, but if your opponent starts putting out some like big limited bombs, all of a sudden now you're getting hit by it. So this can backfire. You want to be really careful. Another thing that kind of gives me a bad taste about this card is you play it for 4 and you get no immediate effect. I really hate doing that. Whenever you play one of these enchantments for 4, 5, 6 mana and it's just sitting on the battlefield, doesn't do anything for a turn or more, it just doesn't feel good to me. So be really careful about playing this card. This is probably one of those cards that's a better constructed card than a limited card. Wrathy Dragon, and this guy is a house. He only costs 4. He's a 5/5 flyer. Yeah, sure, you have to sacrifice a couple mountains when he comes into play. That's fine. For a 5/5 flyer, your opponent's gonna have to deal with this. Love this card. Obviously, hard to splash, so it's going to be a deck that's either two color or mono red in most cases. And you are taking a little gamble. You are risking your mana base. So if you put this guy down and he gets dark banished, instantly, well, that's not going to feel great. But you just got to read your opponent. Hopefully, get him down on the battlefield when the coast is clear, and he's going to get in for some damage for you. Renegade Warlord. I love this guy. He's 5 for 3/3, which I said about the previous card. Felt a little expensive. However, he's got first strike. And then on top of that, whenever he attacks, all your other attacking creatures also get +1/+0. That's awesome value. This is a fantastic limited card. It's even better in aggro decks, obviously, but I'm still going to play this in probably just any red deck or any deck that has red. He's splashable at 1 red. Like this card a lot. And he's at the uncommon slot, so you should see a lot of this guy around. Very good card. Rolling Thunder. It's a very nice versatile burn spell. It lets you late game just kind of burn out an opponent, but in the early and mid game, if you need to take care of some pesky creatures, you can split the spell and take out multiple creatures. Reminds me a little bit of the original Fireball, but it's less complicated. You don't have to pay a mana to actually split. You just simply say, here's my X cost, and here's where I want my damage to go. Incredible card, nice to have. Now this is at the uncommon level, so you might see a few of these floating around. You don't necessarily want to stock your deck with tons of them just because of the cost, but definitely good to have a 1, maybe 2 of in certain decks. Sabertooth Wyvern, and he's another just limited bomb. Love this guy. He's cost 5, but he's a 3/2 flying first strike. That's amazing. This is another card your opponent needs to answer and answer quick, or you just won the game. So overall, I think Red's got some really strong creatures and some really good evasion on their side. Sandstone Warrior, and my first warning about this card is don't try to splash him. You want to have at least probably a 50-50 red in another color deck minimal to play this guy. He's cost double red to cast, and then he has first strike, which is nice, but that first strike doesn't mean a whole lot on a 1/3 creature, so you're really going to want to be using that fire breathing effect that's built in. Now, if you are devoted to red and you got a lot of red mana on hand, he's awesome. This guy will be a house for you because you just get him on the battlefield. He's a great blocker, and then you're going to be able to just move in with him, pump up the first strike damage. It's going to be awesome. So use your judgment when you use him, but if you got a red deck going, he's going to be great. Searing Touch, and this is decent late game buyback spell. It's not for all builds though. There's a lot of good direct damage options out there. Now, with the buyback, this isn't a horrible card by any means, but we've just seen like Lightning Blast and Rolling Thunder and just all these really amazing cards. So this one just doesn't feel as exciting as maybe it could feel in maybe another set. It's there if you need it. Not going to always make your build. Seething Anger, and this can be a late game finisher, so there is some good to it. You can power out basically maybe a +6/+0 for 5 mana. So this guy can be decent, but make sure you have enough targets with evasion before running it. If you're playing maybe a lot of small creatures, aggro, you might want to use this spot for, say, a burn spell instead. There's just so many great burn spells out there. Now, if you're playing shadow creatures, maybe a lot of flyers, then yeah, this starts to make a little more sense in your deck. Shadow Storm, finally something to do against shadow creatures. These shadow creatures just seem to run wild with no way to stop them. So here's finally a way at 1 red you get a sorcery that deals 2 damage to each shadow creature. So obviously this is probably going to start out in your sideboard, but you're going to be happy that this card exists when you need it, and you can just go ahead and side it in. You can even splash red to side it in if you're just having a really hard time with shadow creatures. Pretty good card. Shard Phoenix, and this is one of the mythic rares for the set. It's great versatility. I'm paying 5 for a 2/2. Well, okay, that doesn't feel good, but I can sacrifice him to do direct damage to basically each creature without flying. That could potentially kind of pseudo sweep the board, and then you can of course pay to get him back to your hand. So you are cycling through a lot of red mana. Obviously you want to be pretty devoted to red if you're going to be playing a card like this, but it's a pretty good card. It's just hard to deal with, hard to get rid of. It's going to wreak havoc on certain decks like aggro decks, shadow decks. Very, very strong card. Shatter, classic artifact removal. It's probably going to start in your sideboard, but if you need to get rid of an artifact, Shatter is there for you. Spell Shock. I like this in burn decks, believe it or not, because this affects all players, But if I'm casting Lightning Blast and I'm casting Rolling Thunder and what have you, I'm doing direct damage. And okay, I'm taking 2, but I just did 4 to you. And now anytime you try to cast something to defend yourself, you're still taking another 2. So basically, the burn is going to get me ahead on points, and then you're going to eventually get painted into a corner trying to defend yourself or play out your game. So great in a burn deck. Watch out in the burn mirror, though. This could come back to bite you if your opponent starts playing burn and starts throwing spells at your face. But in the right deck, this is a decent card. If it's in the wrong deck, though, this can really backfire on you. Spinning Hydra. A 4/4 for 5 is great. Now, it doesn't have evasion, but you know, a 4/4 creature in this environment on the ground is hard to deal with. So he's a pretty good guy, and you have the extra option to start taking his power and toughness away to ping other creatures. You have that if you need it. It's a good limited card. I like the versatility. Stark of Wrath, and his is an interesting one. It's a mythic rare. And I'm very surprised to see this kind of there and at the mythic level. I guess it has a strong effect and he's a legendary creature, so I suppose that's why they did it. Here's my thought on this guy. He's very powerful. However, he's much better with a sack outlet. It's awesome to destroy an artifact or a creature, but at the same time, you don't necessarily want that coming back at you. So, yeah, if you play around this, there's some kind of shenanigans you can play with this card. If you don't have those shenanigans, though, I'd probably be real careful about running him. Stun. And normally I'd say, this is decent. It's a cantrip. It can help you get your aggressive creatures across in an aggressive deck. However, there's just so many better options in this set. There's just incredible removal, incredible direct damage. So I'm probably not running this unless for some reason I got a really weak card pool and I'm still running red. So it's not a bad card by any means. And in a lot of sets, I'd say, wow, that's pretty good. But in this case, I'm just not feeling it compared to some of the others. And our last red card for the set is Wall of Diffusion. And this is a good defensive card, especially if you're playing like Izzet or something like that. You can throw this guy down, but what's really important about him is he can block shadow creatures. So he might start off in the sideboard, but you know what? If you're having issues with shadow, bring him on in. And he can be splashed, just like the other anti-shadow cards. So remember those are out there. You know, you might have a situation, game 1, you just get blown out by shadow. Well, even if I'm not playing red, there's some answers in red, so it might be time to splash red and bring these answers in. So that's it for the set review for today. Like I said, we're going to have 2 more parts to the set review, so it's a good time if you haven't to subscribe to the channel. And beyond the set review, I have plans to do 1 more Tempest Remastered video, and then I got a lot of content lined up for the next week. I have a Legacy Cube draft that I haven't posted yet that went very well, which is going to be kind of fun to watch. And I have some product openings that I've already videotaped as well that I want to put on here. And I got a ton of product that actually is here or coming. I just got some boxes of Dragons of Tarkir today, so I'll kind of slowly over the season of Dragons open those. I still got some Fate Reforged packs to open, and I also have some foreign language packs coming as well. I think those are going to be fun to look at, and all that. And I also have pre-release packs coming, so I have all this stuff that we're going to be looking at and tons of things coming up. So thanks a lot. As always, have a great day.